...2022 marks the 10th anniversary of the 2012 Jobs Act. That was a pass that essentially allowed crowdfunding to take place in real estate, ultimately transforming this industry. Real estate now is 25% of the crowdfunding market. Over $15 billion was raised in 2020, and that is, of course, only growing. And in today's episode on the Future of Real Estate podcast, we have Adam Gower on the show. He is one of the experts, has written a book on crowdfunding for real estate, as works with issuers, sponsors, syndicators, fund managers, helping them put together, websites, flows, but really has studied this industry. His company does research and data on this. A fascinating conversation about the future of crowdfunding for real estate. We go back and talk about, what has happened and what's transformed, but then we get into what he thinks is next. We talk about, how institutional money views this crowdfunding space, and how he thinks there really is a place for institutional and crowdfunding money, even on the same deals. We also talked about why he thinks 506C versus a 506B offering is really the only future and the only thing one should be focusing on. Even give some good ideas about what your investment minimum should be. So I really, really enjoyed this episode. This was a great conversation for both passive and active investors. Actives because, this matters to growing your business, and for passive investors and what you want to look for in a deal sponsor and for a real estate investment. I think you're going to love this show. Enjoy it. Adam, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
If I'm the king of finding great guests, Adam is the king of real estate crowdfunding. He's literally wrote the book on this, The Secret World of Real Estate and Crowdfunding. Man, I'm excited to have you here. I was telling you, I heard you on another show, Hunter Thompson. I was like, I got to have this guy on. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. So glad you're here.
Good. I'm glad you've teed it up so high, so set expectations. We've got to really live up to it.
Well, you look like a mad scientist with all the stuff behind you, man. So there must be a method to this madness, which I'm excited to dive in. Clearly, you help syndicators, capital raisers, investors do crowdfund. I mean, that's really what you do. Tell your story a little bit, and then I want to just dive into this crowdfunding thing, but give the audience a chance to get to know you, Adam.
Right. So actually what we do today is we build crowdfunding platforms, or tailor-made crowdfunding platforms for real estate sponsors that want to raise money. So that's kind of the core business that we're in. But we also have a news channel that is exclusively focused on real estate crowdfunding. I came to this industry a very long and circuitous route. So I'm going to try and keep it brief, which is not good. No, I'm not good at, because like I like to say
today, because we got a lot to go over.
My favorite topic is to talk about myself. And you just asked me that, so I could talk for, days on that topic alone. But I'll give you a quick synopsis. So you asked me where I was, and I told you I'd started my life in San Diego. At least I started my life in America, in San Diego. Pulling wires for an electrician. And very quickly, I got involved in financing multifamily real estate development. So this was in the 80s. Then there was a major downturn. It was called the savings, or known as the savings and loan crisis. And I trundled off to Japan, where I ended up running real estate in Asia Pacific for Universal Studios. I was actually a JV, Universal and Paramount. Then I came back and started doing my own deals, and I sold out in 2007, right before the last major crash, and was brought into a bank to help them clean their balance sheet. They'd done a lot of lending collateralized by real estate. A lot of those loans had gone bad. So this was the second time that I saw how real estate can go wrong en masse, right? So the 80s, I saw all these companies going bust. And then in 2008 to 12 or so, there was another wave of it. Mm-hmm. And I did very well during the last downturn and started doing some seed investing. I was investing in these little startups, and they were speaking a foreign language. And the language that they were speaking was the language of digital marketing. I didn't understand a single word they were talking about, but I invested anyway. Go figure. And then the Jobs Act was passed. I know this is something you want to talk about. It's actually the 10th anniversary this year, 2012. It was passed, and I was fascinated by this and realized that this was the first time in history that real estate sponsors would be able to raise capital online, right? They would be able to actively market, and real estate investors could, for the first time, invest in deals all over the country. And it's just never been possible before. So I dived in and basically taught myself everything about digital marketing. I built websites, I did coding. I mean, I really did. It was a hard grind figuring it out. I'll tell you that.
I mean, think about it. There wasn't much in 2012. I mean, digital marketing, even that was pretty new in 2012.
Well, it was brand new for real estate. I mean, you know, marketing tactics and strategies have been developing for well over 100 years.
Sure.
Since it was used to be called direct marketing, where people would send out letters, right? Mailers and letters. And it's kind of the same with the digital world. The same tactics and strategies and the same psychology applies to capital issuers as well as they do to investors. Right. So it's basically the same process. But I learned the industry, and I can tell you that since it started in 2012, real estate crowdfunding has exploded in growth.
Adam, this is what so I think you give such a great context. You were there and saw the Jobs Act get passed. I mean, so was I was alive. Not that I'm that young, but my point is that, you know, I didn't really even hear about the Jobs Act really until about 2017, right? When this world kind of was open to me. And I think a lot of people come into that space and don't realize we're only 10 years in to this way of doing things. And so can you take us back a little bit and kind of tell us the history of that and what you've seen really develop over the last 10 years? And I really want to get into this in detail.
Sure. So there's a couple things. First of all, the history, really the most interesting thing about the history, and I wrote a book called Leaders of the Crowd. I interviewed people at the White House and in Congress and some of the lobbyists and early adopters, etc., to kind of figure out where did it come from. Mm-hmm. And what I found the most interesting was that when the Jobs Act of 2012 was passed, nobody at all imagined that it would benefit real estate. It was never intended for real estate. It was intended for small and medium-sized businesses and startups. Jumpstart our business startups, Jobs Act. And because real estate developers form new companies every time they do a deal to bring people in and investors and to create operating systems, whatever, those are by definition small companies. And so completely accidentally, the Jobs Act benefited real estate, and real estate has been the industry that has benefited the most. I was talking to Woody Ness, who was one of the original lobbyists for the Jobs Act, and he tracks non-real estate investing. And last year, non-real estate crowdfunding. And last year, that industry exploded in growth to $1 billion. I can tell you that we did an analysis of the industry in another book, actually, that I wrote called Unleashed. But we did an analysis of the size of the industry. And we're about to update that. That's being written right now. We're just passing the data now. But we found that real estate alone, so last year, non-real estate did $1 billion. In 2020, real estate alone did 15 billion in crowdfunded deals. And that represented 25% of all capital formation in private equity real estate, non-institutional. That is an extraordinary growth trajectory to go from, and you say 2012, the act was passed in 2012, right, but the laws weren't promulgated until 2013, 14. So it's not really 10 years, actually less.
Right. And
the industry has grown to being, I can't let you in just yet to what the size of the market was last year, but it was 25% in 2020. That is domination of the industry. The crowdfunding will soon be the only real option for raising capital for real estate.
Interesting. You mentioned, I heard you, so you mentioned, before this was very institutional or kind of, like big family type way of doing things. And I heard you talk on the podcast where I heard you initially about the ways this is impacting institutional investors and what might be create like a hybrid approach. Can you talk about just how you see crowdfunding now and the way we're doing it, individual credit investors? What's going to change, man, in terms of these bigger institutional guys? And is it making it easier, harder for them? Is that going to leave room for guys like us to raise money? I'm curious. I want to dive deeper on that part about when you were getting into how this is going to shape the institutional level and how that funnels down to kind of the syndication level.
The emergence of institutional interest in crowdfunding is really recent news. This is just ever so slightly starting to show up on institutional capital's radars. When the industry first started, we all scratched our heads, and I had a lot of conversations. You can listen to them, if you want to go back historically, listen to the podcast, some of them that I had. But we had discussions about how big was this industry going to get. And the initial thought was it's going to bump up against private equity shops that are doing $20 to $50 million deals. Once crowdfunding kind of hits that level, it's going to hit a ceiling, and it's just going to stop because these established companies or these established shops that, have a business model that's been in place for decades to provide equity to these middle market sponsors.
Right.
But it's blown through that ceiling. And now you see, our clients regularly raise, 20 million and up in single offerings. We've got one raising 50 at the moment. We've raised multiple $20+ million deals. I know that CrowdStreet have done some 40 million. That's just equity. These are just huge numbers.
Right.
And as you start to get into that rarefied earth or rarefied air of larger deal sizes, inevitably you start to attract the interest of institutional investors. And so that's what we're seeing. We see that in terms of the size of the deals. Here at Gower Crowd, we are approached increasingly frequently by institutional investors and institutional companies that have only ever before raised money from institutions. Let's just define what that term means. An institution is, in this context, is a pension fund, a university endowment, an insurance company, a sovereign wealth fund, etc. Possibly also very large scale family offices, right? So those are the institutions that we refer to. And if you think about it, what's interesting also to me is that, especially with pension funds and insurance companies, they are using the same money as crowdfunding. Why? Because the money that they have, even though it's in huge numbers, has all been assembled from individuals. It's all individual insurance policies or contributions to pensions or individual donations to endowments or to universities. So it's all people like you and me providing the capital to institutions that they can then deploy to,
at a mass scale. Right.
At a mass scale, exactly. Right. So it is similar.
Well, I'm just curious, do you think, has institutional prior been, I guess that's where I look to your expertise and knowledge is, has institutional been hesitant to partner on deals where there is crowdfunding? And do you see more of a blend of that happening, or where do you see this going?
Well, like I said, it's in the very early stages of emergence in the institutional world. So first of all, I don't see any pushback from institutions to sponsors who are raising capital from individual investors as well. If anything, they are intrigued by this trend. So that's number one. Number two, from an investor's perspective, if you can invest in a deal alongside an institutional investor, that is probably one of your best ways of mitigating risk. And this is why. What you hear in crowdfunding a lot is invest in our institutional quality deal. Well, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean scale? Does it mean that it's just a class A building in somewhere or something? Like, what does that exactly mean? Well, the most important aspect of an institutional caliber deal is less the deal itself, actually, and its characteristics, and more the way that the deal is underwritten. So you will start with a sponsor who does their due diligence and analyzes the deal and then presents it to their institutional partner. An institutional partner will then not just take the word of the sponsor for it. They will engage in extremely detailed due diligence to check the sponsor's work product. They will hire third-party appraisers and specialists who will go in and examine a building because they have a fiduciary responsibility to all of their investors. And in some cases, they will spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars just verifying the sponsor's assumptions. That's a huge deal. Nobody who invests $10,000 or $25,000 is going to do that. They're going to rely entirely on the relationship that they develop with that sponsor and their level of trust with the sponsor.
Right.
But if that sponsor has an institutional partner and says, hey, look, Michigan Pension Fund has invested in this deal, 30 million, and we've set aside 5 million for individual investors, as an investor, that the only reason that institution would invest is because they have done their homework, not just on the deal, but also on the sponsor.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. If you're putting 50K in, it sure makes you feel a lot better when someone's got 10 million in, or
yes.
20 million in.
Yes, exactly. And if they've done they have done their homework. Now, you're not seeing that just yet, at least not at scale. But some of our clients are moving towards that, where we're going to be presenting deals that have institutional investors alongside individual investors.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely can see the hybrid of this. And I mean, I think crowdfunding is going to be really important because, for example, if we could get institutional capital in some of our deals and they say, hey, we'll bring 80% of the capital stack or 70% of the capital stack, you guys still you'll need to go bring in the other 30. Well, on a big deal, that still could be $10 to $20 million that we'll still need to have to raise. So I could see, right, where an institutional partner would come in and we could be required or maybe even negotiate, hey, we still want to bring in 20% and be able to align it like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it de-risks the investment for the institution.
Yeah.
By reducing their exposure and their dollars into a deal, which may or may not be good, right? They want to deploy large numbers quickly.
Right.
But at the same time, they are investing the same people's money. At the end of the day, they're taking a lower risk approach.
Yeah.
But individual investors are taking a higher risk, taking an equity piece. So it's definitely complementary is the word.
Adam, you had the privilege of interviewing Ben Miller on your show.
Yeah.
Fundrise, founder of Fundrise. Their growth is unbelievable. It's pretty crazy. First, I want to ask you biggest takeaways you had from that conversation, and I got some interesting points I want to ask you about. But your biggest takeaways from that conversation with Ben?
Well, the biggest takeaway that I had was that Ben actually started crowdfunding before crowdfunding was legalized. I mean, he didn't do anything illegal, but he was exploring how the heck can I sell shares essentially in my deals to more than just my close group of, friends and colleagues, right? Mm-hmm. Friends, family, and colleagues. Mm-hmm. And so he was exploring ways to expand his network of investors before the Jobs Act was passed. So when it was passed, it was a fillip to him to go ahead and build, form Fundrise and to really build a business. So I think what I took away was that he was one of the visionaries in the industry. He saw it coming before it actually arrived.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. You guys ended talking about, are you a tech company or are you a real estate company? And I'm curious, when you think about the future of crowdfunding, how much real estate investors have to learn to be tech companies to really have success in the near future? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so you don't really. And when you say real estate investors, you mean issuers, people that are raising capital.
Right, that's correct.
So you don't really. There is a lot of tech behind it. I don't want to understate this. It's similar. It's just the evolution of the way that you have to do business. So in the past, you would have, a long time ago, you'd have a business card. That would be your calling card, would be a business card, a little piece of card with your name and phone number on it, basically, right? The logo. That then evolved into websites. You had to have a website. Well, you didn't need to know how to build a website. You needed to know how to hire somebody to build a website. It's like, as a developer, you don't need to be a plumber. You need to know how to find a plumber, right? That can show up on time and do a good job at the right price, right? And on time. So in the same way, sponsors today can hire people to build out all their tech for us. That's why we're in business. We build these platforms. And then we deliver them to sponsors in a way that, first of all, once we deliver it, the thing just kind of runs on autopilot with a little bit of maintenance, but not very much. And then we build it in a way that makes it as easy as possible for them to keep building on top of it.
Right.
So you need to do it properly, you've got to have advanced technical abilities and knowledge. But if you're a real estate developer, you need to stick to your guns and to your expertise and hire somebody to put that in place for you, just as you would hire an accountant or a lawyer or a plumber or an electrician or a framer. You just hire a specialist and you add them to your team. So you don't need to know how to do it. You just need to know who are the best, who show up on time and get the job done.
Yeah, the who, not how principle. That makes a lot of sense. I was just curious. Clearly they've built a tech company, it seems like, in some ways. And so I was just curious to see how much you see that evolving. But I think that's good news. And I think I agree with you. I think for sure you have to understand that everything is online now. And if you're not online, that's going to hurt your business. You may not need to know how to put it all together, but you need to know what it looks like and how it operates on the back end, for sure.
So one of my conversations with Brent Higglekey, who is Chief Marketing Officer at CrowdStreet, it's actually one of the podcasts, and you can listen to that as well. He's an interesting guy. He said, if you don't have a substantial online presence today, you don't exist.
Yeah, I agree.
And I actually shared that with a guy who was considering hiring us, and he scoffed at the idea. He actually came back 6 months later and hired us, which is fairly typical of what happens when I speak to somebody. They disappear, they try a bunch of stuff, and then they figure, all right, we get it. We'll hire you. Right? It's what typically happens. But he scoffed at it. And the way that I explained it to him was like this. Of course you exist, right? You're sitting there, you've got a business, you've got all this staff, you've got your investors, right? Your friends and family that have financed you forever. But the world of crowdfunding, when a physician somewhere else in the country decides he wants to invest in multifamily real estate or self-storage or senior housing or whatever your asset class is, and he runs a search, or she runs a search that says, how do I invest in self-storage? And you don't show up on the search results, you don't exist. You don't exist. They will find somebody else. They will learn from that other person and they will invest in that other person. It has gone from being a website used to be the mandatory. You had to have a website. Now that is the same. You might as well just carry around business cards with you. You got to have a proper system that Harvard identifies, attracts, nurtures, and converts prospects into being investors.
By the way, that's a whole nother episode, and I want to bring you back to just even talk about your process. But man, I have so many things I want to get into. Let me come back to the Fundrise if we have time, because I wanted to ask you, well, let me ask you this. Did you agree with his thesis on the fund model and why they decided to go fund? I mean, I know you've probably worked a lot with folks who do individual raises. I'm curious just to get your take on, and maybe explain to our audience, why he proposed they went fund model only, and what your thought was on that. I found that to be interesting. It made a lot of sense, but clearly maybe not always possible for an investor or operator like us to kind of build this massive diversified fund that like a Fundrise.
Yeah. So this is a topic that comes up all the time, comes up with institutional size sponsors all the way to, down to, smaller guys, right? That aren't institutional. The question is, should I raise money for individual deals or should I form a fund? Well, yes, of course, it would be lovely to think that you could raise 50 million, have it sitting in the bank and then go shopping. It doesn't work like that, number one. Number two, the business of crowdfunding, like it is in real estate capital formation of any kind, in person or online, it does not matter how you do it. If you're doing it one person at a time or you're doing it online, it is all about education. If you think about your investors, just picture in your mind any one of your investors and cast your mind back to the first day you met that person. And then recall, if you can, the number of times that you met, how many questions they asked, what you sent to them, how many emails you exchanged. What was that communication? What did that look like? It was probably cavernous, right? It's really ginormous amount of communication. That whole process was you teaching them how to invest with you, to trust you, and that you know what you're doing enough that they would invest. It's a process of education. So when you form a fund, you have to now cross another educational hurdle. It's attractive to you, but from an investor's perspective, your pitch is basically, send me your money.
Right.
I've not decided what to invest in yet,
right,
but I will do later.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's good reasons for doing that. You've just got to now cross that education hurdle and explain to somebody why they should invest in a fund, not in an individual deal. So it's doable. It's harder because you have to teach now about funds in addition to teaching people about real estate and your value proposition.
Makes sense. And there's a degree of trust too, right? That probably, and I see that's why a lot of folks, I think, start with single asset and then maybe get into a fund because they've built the trust with their investors to be able to do a fund, where it's a lot easier, I think, early on to pitch the deal because it's something that investors can look at and at least they feel like, okay, I'm making a good investment decision because I've done my vetting, my own vetting,
But even then, Ellis, investors, existing investors that have chosen to invest in deal, B out of ABC that you've sent them, the fact that they trust you doesn't mean that they're going to, dance on the table in joy that you've formed a fund. Right. They might say, no, look, that's fine. I don't want to be in every deal, but I like that one. I want to invest in that deal alone. So it's an education process. It's not easy. Yeah. There are ways of hacking through it and increasing your conversion rates. But at the high level, just think about it as an extra layer of education that you have to impart.
Let me ask you a couple of questions that just from a business standpoint, from a capital raising standpoint, to get your expertise. One of them I have right now is 506B versus 506C. Currently, we've done one 506C raise and we've done a couple 506Bs. I guess I'm always of the question is when is it time to just go 506C? I'm curious to even know from an industry standpoint, is 506B going to be around in a couple of years or would only be 506C? Love to get your thoughts.
I am not really sure why anybody does well, I do know why people do 506Bs today. It's because they don't understand the benefits of a 506C. To clarify the difference for that one person in your audience that doesn't know, a 506B allows, you can only raise money from people in your immediate circle. You have to have a pre-existing relationship with them. You can also raise from a small group of non-accredited investors. But the principle is that you can only solicit from people you already know, right? That's kind of the key thing. And up until 2012, that was the only way you could raise money for real estate, private equity real estate. We did these deals back in the 80s. With the Jobs Act of 2012, 506c was passed. And what 506c, and C doesn't stand for crowdfunding, but it may as well. What 506c allows you to do is allows you to now actively go out and market to people you've never met before. It's called general solicitation. You can go to the general public as though you were doing an IPO, right? You can invite people to invest in your deal. You cannot include non-accredited investors in a 506c raise, and it is ever so slightly harder to verify somebody as being accredited with a 506c, but that's strictly administrative. So the big difference is that with a 506c, you can advertise, you can put it all over your website, you can post on social media, invest with me, you can fly a plane over your city with a phone number on it.
Yeah, you can do whatever. You can
whatever
let people
you
know.
want. Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm really not sure. I mean, this is one of the things that we track. That 25% take of the private equity real estate capital in or raised in 2020 was all 506c, a little bit of Reg A as well, but those kind of much smaller relatively. So that's what we track, is that. And I don't know why people use B. I think it's just because they don't understand the benefits and because they're used to it. They just pull out the same docs that they've been using forever.
Right. Well, I do. I mean, I think for us, I mean, up until recently, about 50%, on our, as we did $1 million raise, a $2 million, like at first, 50% of that was Class B investors. It was people who we knew. And so I can see why people are hesitant to go, because then you have this base of folks who you relied on that can then are no longer qualify for your deal. But I think to your point is, as you learn to market and build a brand and build exposure, it makes less and less sense and as you do bigger deals, because it's only 35 people. I mean, that's the only amount of people. Non-accredited, 35 non-accredited. Exactly.
So if you want non-accredited investors, you want to see, but I'm not sure it's, if you're looking to scale, you need accredited investors, you need to do a 506c, period. It's no mystery. It's just end of story. And you're right, it won't go away completely, but it will become very quickly, it's going to become the minority of deals will be 506bs for sure.
Second question, minimum investments. We've played around with this. Right now, our minimum investment is $50,000. But what I've noticed is this, Adam, is that if you have a minimum, the majority of people are going to put the minimum in, even if they have more. What do you teach your clients in terms of minimum investments, and what have you seen work, and what's typical?
So irrespective of how much your minimum is, 10,000 or 25,000, i.e. lower than 50, the average investment's around 45,000, right? So that's the average investment that you see in any deal. First time investor. The important thing to keep in mind is that it takes a lot of effort to get an investor in the first place. You're going to spend time and money to get them. And that first investment is going to be on average around 45,000. So your minimum of 50. So that's probably why they're coming in with 50. But if you then treat them right, keep them fully informed, continue to nurture them, continue to educate them, keep them updated on how the deal's going, warts and all, what will happen is that while it might have cost you a lot to get them in the first place, the cost of them investing the next time is zero. It's really zero. There's no cost of acquisition because they're already an investor.
Right.
And so what you will find is that your investors' lifetime value to you will be substantially more than their initial investment, provided you deliver and you deliver well. Then it's that minimum's almost irrelevant. You could try going lower and see how it works. You could try teasing some, you could test it. I mean, that's the point of digital marketing, is to test any idea. So if you wanted to test a 25,000.
No, I don't want to go lower. I want to go higher is my point, right? Like I think that's my point, right?
Well, that's wonderful. But think about this. So there is a psychological response that people have. This is no matter what you're doing. And that is this idea of cognitive dissonance. That was my my undergraduate degree was political psychology, actually, of all things, cognitive dissonance. So if you do something on a small scale first, the chances are that you will do it on a larger scale later. And the classic example of this is the test that was done during election season when somebody walked around a neighborhood, this was a study, and said to people, will you put this teeny little sign for my candidate in your window? And so some people said yes, and they put it in the window. And then they came back and they said, hey, thanks so much for having this little sign in the window. We've now got this monster sign. Can we put that in your yard? And the people who had said yes to the little thing first were significantly more likely to agree to doing the big thing next. So if you can bring people in to your network with a smaller investment just to test the waters, the chances are that they will invest more later because they have already invested a small amount with you. It's a natural reaction to believe that you made the right decision the first time.
No, and I think, Adam, it makes sense too. And more as I think hear about you say that, I think about our investors, they do start with 50, but the lifetime is like they're typically investing in multiple deals. So maybe they didn't put 101 deal, they might put 250 across a couple deals.
Okay.
And so that makes sense. I think you're actually helping me kind of formulate where should our minimums be.
So here's what you can do, Ellis. You could, for example, what you could do is on your next deal, you could test it. Just test it. You've probably got a bunch of people. You should have a bunch of people who've said no, right? They've not invested. You've got a big email list. 99.9% of people that see you online, see your website, look at your deals are going to say no the first time. They're going to walk away. The only people that matters, that 1 in 1,000 who writes a check, that person is going to change your life, right? But you've still got 99% of people who are still humming and hawing on the sidelines. So the best thing that you can do is tickle them out, you pardon the expression. And the way to do that is to, on your next deal, you say, hey, look, we are offering a minimum of, you could go wherever you like, 10,000 to the first 100 people that sign up. It's $1 million for you. So the first 100 people, 10,000, and then we're shutting this down. It's back to 50,000, and see what kind of response you get, right? If you get a good response, now you've suddenly converted a bunch of people who were sitting on the sidelines because they didn't want to drop 50 grand. They don't know you. They want to test you. You want to see how good you are. They want to see what kind of results you get. They want to see how you communicate. They want to see how you perform. So make it easy for them to do that, right? It's just an idea.
I think it's gold. I think it's a gold
20
idea.
people, 50 people, whatever number you want to pick,
Yeah.
and then shut it down. But then make sure that you knock their socks off.
Right.
Right. And then you can up them to the next. Then they will invest 50 in the next one.
That's fabulous. That's a fantastic idea. We're getting to the end of our time here, but I'd be amiss not to ask you about something we've talked about a lot on this show. And I hear a lot of people in the industry talking about it. I'm still not sure, even though I've done a lot of research on it, if it's just something new and sexy that real estate investors are trying to jump in on, or is it actually technology that will disrupt our industry? And that's the blockchain and tokenization. I'm curious what you've done on this topic in terms of research or studying, how you see it influencing, not 100 years from now, but even 5 to 10 years from now.
The way I like to talk about blockchain. So the answer to that question is it needs to be talked about beyond tech. This is my mantra for this. If I was to say to you, 20 years ago, hey, look, instead of having to sign a paper document, we've created a system that reproduces this in digits, and it's sent in packets over a line, and all these different technologies that we've woven into it, you don't need to sign anything anymore. All you need to do is to click a button on a website and you will now have a contract to invest in me. You would say, you have got to be joking. I am not even remotely interested in that. And that was DocuSign. Now, DocWrite used to fax contracts or FedEx them overnight to get them signed. And then DocuSign came along. And all DocuSign is a digital version that is secure of a contract. So if you can say, no, here, you can do it online, it's totally secure, banks use it, or, it's commonplace. You can sign it online. It's totally secure. You describe the benefits. You don't have to, you can access the documents online. Here they are, send you a PDF, etc., etc. If you describe the benefits, people will buy into it. But if you talk about the tech, and that's all I ever see with blockchain and crypto and whatever, all these other, ideas are, people, who cares? Again, the other example is the lawnmower, right? Do you want a gorgeous green lawn of grass in front of your house that is the envy of your neighbors? Yes, then buy my lawnmower. Or you can say, I sell a lawnmower that the rotary blades go round at 400 times a minute and the gas consumption is this and it's deathly. Who cares about how it works? All you need to know are the benefits. And the primary benefit, from what I understand from our clients about blockchain, is you can trade it. That's all you need to say. Invest with me, it's tradable. You invest with somebody else, you can't trade the asset. You can't trade it. There's no secondary markets. With blockchain, invest with us, same kind of contracts. The language is the same. We're going to deliver. It's not DocuSign. You're going to get it a slightly different way than DocuSign, but same principle, but you can trade it.
Right.
That to me is a benefit. That's what you should talk about. So that's the answer to that question.
No, it's good. And I think that's right on. I mean, I think that's where we got to, most people got to figure out how we're going to use this thing. And it is more of the tech conversation, because I think most people are still confused. Well, how do we actually going to use it? And how's it actually going to work? So that's a really good.
Yeah. And you don't think about that when you buy a car. How does it work? You think about, how does it look? How fast does it go? Is it going to get me from A to B? You don't think about, all right, tell me how the engine works. No, you might, but not many people do.
Guys, if you've enjoyed this show, I just can't recommend enough. Make sure you follow Adam. Adam, you got a lot of going on. You have a newsletter and a website. Please tell folks where they can learn more about you and get on this newsletter that you just came out with.
Sure. So the newsletter goes out every Wednesday. In fact, I'm still writing it now. I'm a little bit late today, actually. But it will go out a bit later today. It exclusively covers all the news and updates in real estate crowdfunding. It is the center of gravity for all things real estate crowdfunding. And to get to it, go to gowercrowd.com. You'll probably see a subscribe button somewhere on the page. You better add. Sign up there and click on the news tab. I'm actually about to revamp the homepage, but click on the news tab at the top of the website, and you'll see everything there. There's articles we write, original content on what's going on in the industry. We have a list of every single deal that is advertised. So you can find every deal there. That's the social media ads tab. We clock every single deal that is listed with the SEC. So you can see that. There's a bunch of graphs. You can see every single deal that goes out. It is the only comprehensive source for everything to do with crowdfunding, real estate crowdfunding.
All right, just guys, it was super easy. Gower Crowd, GOWER crowd.com. There's a subscribe button, just like he says in the top right. You enter your name and email, and you're in. So I highly recommend.
It's priced right because it's free.
That's it. You didn't have to pull up my credit card. So
no. Exactly.
Adam, fantastic. This did not disappoint. I'm so grateful for your contribution into this industry, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to following you, and I hope everyone does as well. So thanks so much, man.
Ellis, a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
All right, guys.